A major revelation in this unfolding legal drama centers on DailyMail reporter James Lassutka, who allegedly attempted to distance himself from the lawsuit involving Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and Wayfair. According to text messages shared in court filings, James reached out to celebrity attorney Brian Freriedman, urgently requesting that his name be removed from any legal documents. He expressed deep concern that his involvement, even if his name was redacted, could jeopardize his career. The implication was clear. James felt threatened, possibly by his own employer, the DailyMail. He stated that being linked to the case in any way could cost him his job, suggesting intense internal pressure to avoid being tied to potentially defamatory stories. This raised eyebrows in legal circles and the media alike, as it hinted at a broader cover-up, one where a major outlet like the DailyMail might have gone to great lengths to protect itself and its sources, even at the expense of a reporter's integrity and job security. At the heart of the controversy is Leslie Sloan, Blake Lively's publicist, who is now being directly implicated as the source behind several damaging and possibly defamatory stories about Justin Baldoni. According to court documents and internal communications, Sloan allegedly provided false and misleading information to DailyMail reporters, including claims that Baldoni was abusive, misogynistic, and sidelined both Blake and author Colleen Hoover during the production of It Ends With Us. These narratives reportedly aim to justify Blake's unprecedented control over the film, despite her being hired only as an actress. Crucially, Sloan then turned around and denied these actions in legal declarations, claiming she never told reporters anything defamatory. But leaked texts and screenshots directly contradict her denials, showing a clear paper trail of planted stories and attempts to manipulate media coverage in Blake's favor. This contradiction not only weakens her credibility, but also exposes a potential strategy of deception meant to control the public narrative and undermine Baldoni's reputation. One of the most damning elements revealed in this case is the collection of contradictory text messages between Leslie Sloan and DailyMail reporter James Lassutka. While Sloan publicly insists she never pushed false claims or manipulated the media, the screenshots tell a different story. In the messages, James outright calls Sloan a liar, pointing out that she gave him one version of events in August 2024 and then changed her story months later, shifting from general criticism of Baldoni's behavior to full-blown allegations of sexual harassment. These text exchanges were included in the New York Times defamation lawsuit filed by Wayfair, and they directly undermined Sloan's credibility. Rather than exonerating her, the messages show that reporters were confused and even suspicious about her shifting narratives, with one of them asking why her story kept evolving. This contradiction is especially damaging given that Sloan later submitted a declaration under oath, claiming she never provided defamatory info when the texts seemed to prove otherwise. What's unfolding behind the scenes goes far beyond media spin. It points to a potentially coordinated cover-up involving one of the world's largest tabloid outlets. According to the video, after reporter James Lassutka's name surfaced in legal filings related to the Wayfair vs. New York Times lawsuit, he sent a panicked message to Blake Lively's attorney, Brian Freriedman. In this text, James explicitly asked to be removed from the lawsuit entirely, stating that any association with the case, even with names redacted, could destroy his career. He wasn't just protecting his reputation, he was trying to protect his livelihood. James insisted that mentioning his name or linking him to DailyMail in the context of the lawsuit would jeopardize my job and career, which is a strong indication that he was being pressured, if not outright threatened, by his employer. The timing of this message is critical. It came in January 2025, shortly after Wayfair filed a lawsuit against the New York Times, but before they formally filed against Blake Lively. The fact that James acted preemptively suggests he knew that once the lawsuit progressed and the spotlight turned to DailyMail's reporting, his internal communications and sourcing could come under legal scrutiny. More importantly, it implies that DailyMail had a vested interest in keeping his name and their involvement out of the legal spotlight. The video posits that this pressure may have gone beyond just corporate anxiety. It may have bordered on legal coercion. There's a disturbing suggestion that DailyMail could have threatened James with termination or even legal consequences if he didn't cooperate with their efforts to contain the fallout. This begs the question, was James forced to sign a legal declaration that didn't reflect the truth? Because what's clear from earlier texts is that James had previously admitted to Wayfair that Sloan had been the source of the defamatory claims, and that she had lied to him multiple times. So when he later submitted a declaration clearing Sloan of wrongdoing, it didn't align with his own messages. That contradiction raises serious doubts about the credibility of his statement and whether it was made voluntarily or under duress. This revelation is more than a personal crisis for one journalist. It shines a harsh light on how a major media organization may have tried to bury its mistakes and silence the one insider who could confirm the truth. As the web of contradictions continues to unravel, another crucial detail comes into focus. Leslie Sloan's legal filings appear to omit key facts and timelines that completely undermine her narrative. According to the messages shared between her and reporter James Lassutka, the story she presented in her declaration and in her motion for sanctions, particularly the claim that publicist Melissa Nathan orchestrated a smear campaign against Blake Lively, doesn't hold up when compared to actual evidence. One glaring inconsistency is the timeline of events. Leslie insists that the wave of online backlash Blake received was a direct result of Melissa Nathan's hiring, suggesting it was part of a deliberate effort to damage Blake's image. But James provided proof that the backlash began days before Melissa was even officially hired. In fact, he sent texts confirming that Melissa had no involvement in the critical articles being published at the time. He told Leslie repeatedly that the negative coverage of Blake was organic, driven by her own actions, such as her controversial interviews and tone-deaf promotional remarks, including the now infamous "grab your florals and bring your friends" comment and the joke about GPS tracking. Despite this, Sloan attempted to pin the blame on Melissa almost immediately after she was brought on board. The messages show that Sloan had already decided Melissa was the source of the backlash just days into her job, before she'd even had a chance to manage digital strategy or media relations. That narrative was later woven into legal motions, claiming Melissa and others were leading a calculated campaign to discredit Blake. But the actual text messages from James tell a completely different story, one where Melissa is repeatedly defended and where James insists that nothing anti-Blake came from her. Even more troubling is that Sloan never addresses these contradictions in her motion for attorney's fees or sanctions. She simply ignores the fact that the reporter she relied on had already told multiple people, including Blake's legal team, that he didn't believe a smear campaign ever happened. Her filing relies on a revised version of events, one that conveniently excludes any mention of the earlier texts that would prove otherwise. This kind of selective storytelling isn't just misleading, it's potentially damaging to the credibility of the case. If a court later finds that Sloan intentionally omitted evidence or misrepresented the sequence of events, it could backfire dramatically. And the fact that she's now demanding $1.3 million in attorney's fees, based in part on a narrative that doesn't align with what was actually said, could raise even more red flags. At best, it's a reckless oversight. At worst, it's a strategic attempt to distort the truth for financial and reputational gain. Another layer of this complex story involves James Lassutka's evolving statements, which further unravel Leslie Sloan's credibility. Back in August 2024, James privately told Wayfair's legal team that Leslie was the source behind the defamatory stories published in the DailyMail. At the time, she allegedly told him that Justin Baldoni was abusive, misogynistic, and dismissive of both Blake and author Colleen Hoover. These claims ended up being the backbone of several articles meant to justify Blake's expanded role on the film, beyond acting, as someone influencing rewrites, creative decisions, and even allegedly bringing in her husband, Ryan Reynolds, to fix the script. But here's the kicker. James's narrative later shifted, especially after he came under pressure from the Daily Mail. He submitted a formal declaration stating that Sloan never told him anything defamatory and that she never mentioned sexual harassment. This sudden change contradicted everything he had previously told others, including Freriedman and even Sloan herself in private messages. And that raises a critical question. Why did James change his story? Was it fear, legal pressure, or something more sinister like being forced to sign a declaration under duress? In the texts, James clearly lays out that Leslie gave him damaging quotes, including claims that Blake had to take over the film because Justin was failing as a director. He mentions how she told him Ryan was brought in to save the movie and how Blake supposedly had to rewrite major portions of the script. These messages indicate a coordinated narrative fed to the press, aimed at painting Blake as the professional heroine and Justin as the problem. And here's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. In his private messages, James repeatedly calls Leslie dishonest. He accuses her of giving conflicting stories and openly says that she's lying about the original source of the articles. But then, after his name shows up in a lawsuit and his job is on the line, he suddenly claims in a formal legal filing that none of that ever happened. This flip-flop is more than just suspicious. It raises ethical and legal concerns about whether James was coerced by the Daily Mail, or perhaps even by legal teams involved in the case, into submitting a declaration that whitewashed his earlier truthful statements. If that's true, then Sloan's entire legal strategy, which heavily leans on James's declaration, could be built on a false foundation. This entire sequence of events paints a disturbing picture. A publicist feeding false stories to the press, a media outlet trying to cover its tracks, and a journalist trapped in the middle, possibly silenced to protect corporate interests. And in the process, the line between truth and legal fiction is becoming dangerously blurred. The video also brings attention to the alleged bias in how the Daily Mail presented coverage of the controversy, particularly in favor of Blake Lively. According to the evidence laid out, the outlet strategically published pro-Blake content as freely accessible articles, while placing any positive reporting about Justin Baldoni behind a paywall. This subtle but effective tactic ensured that casual readers and the broader public, most of whom aren't subscribers, only saw the narrative the outlet wanted them to see: that Blake was a professional, a victim of backlash, and unjustly targeted. Meanwhile, any content that could rehabilitate Justin's image or contradict Leslie Sloan's narrative was locked behind a subscription barrier, limiting its reach and impact. This editorial decision isn't just a questionable business move, it's a powerful manipulation of public perception. By prioritizing one-sided coverage, the Daily Mail appears to have crafted a media environment that insulated Blake from criticism while leaving Justin exposed to a flurry of negative publicity. Even though, internally, their own reporter, James Lassutka, was telling Sloan directly that the backlash against Blake was organic and not the result of any smear campaign, the stories being promoted told a different tale. Instead of reflecting the nuanced reality James was privately describing, the public-facing articles painted Melissa Nathan and others as masterminds behind a vicious campaign to discredit Blake. What makes this even more troubling is that after Wayfair's lawsuit was filed and their evidence came to light, the tone of Daily Mail's reporting appeared to shift. Some articles started to present more favorable coverage of Justin, but by that point, the damage had already been done. And again, those stories were largely paywalled. The average reader, especially someone just browsing headlines, would have no idea that the original claims against Justin were being walked back, or that the very reporters involved were contradicting Sloan's narrative. This deliberate curation of coverage raises questions about journalistic integrity at the Daily Mail. If the outlet knew the story had changed, if they were aware their own journalist had admitted to being misled, why didn't they correct the record publicly? Why weren't retractions or clarifications issued? Instead, it seems they chose to bury the truth behind a paywall while letting the defamatory content about Justin circulate freely, unchecked, and widely read. In short, the Daily Mail's editorial choices weren't just biased. They appear to have aided in the misinformation campaign Sloan was allegedly orchestrating, whether knowingly or as a matter of negligent oversight. And if that's the case, the outlet may not only be facing a reputational crisis, but potentially legal liability as well. Perhaps one of the most disturbing elements revealed in this video is the suggestion that James Lassutka's formal declaration may have been made under duress. In his original private communications, James made it very clear. Leslie Sloan lied, provided him with false information, and attempted to spin a narrative that made Justin Baldoni appear controlling, misogynistic, and even abusive, all in order to bolster Blake Lively's role in the film. He also said she tried to blame the backlash Blake received on Melissa Nathan, despite overwhelming evidence that the backlash began long before Melissa was ever involved in the project. But when the legal pressure mounted, and after Daily Mail reportedly threatened him with termination or legal consequences, James submitted a declaration that directly contradicted his prior messages. In this document, he claimed Sloan had never told him anything defamatory and that she hadn't contributed to the negative articles. This abrupt reversal not only raises serious ethical red flags, but could have major legal implications. If James signed that document under pressure, whether from Daily Mail lawyers, Leslie's legal team, or both, it may be grounds for the declaration to be withdrawn or, at the very least, discredited in court. What's worse is that Sloan's legal strategy now hinges on that very declaration. In her motion for $1.3 million in attorney's fees and sanctions, she repeatedly cites James's revised version of events as proof that she acted ethically. But if that document doesn't reflect the truth and all signs point to it not, then the court is being asked to rule on a foundation built on manipulation, fear, and corporate pressure. This isn't just about journalistic ethics anymore. It's about whether the legal system is being weaponized to silence truth and protect reputations at any cost. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that this entire situation may have been orchestrated to control the public narrative around Blake Lively and the film It Ends With Us. The texts between James and Leslie show not just a PR cleanup, but a deliberate attempt to guide media coverage, pressure reporters, and eliminate any storylines that didn't serve Blake's image. Sloan tried to rally James into shifting the narrative away from Justin, asking him to please make it turn around, and suggesting he publish articles to help reframe Blake as the victim. At one point, she outright blamed reporter Stephanie Jones for negative coverage and called her a liar, not because her information was inaccurate, but because it didn't serve Blake's PR interests. Leslie made it clear she wanted to shut down certain stories and would even get the entire cast to go on record if needed to apply pressure. Even more telling is that she did all of this while publicly claiming she wasn't feeding stories to the press. She dismissed the idea of a smear campaign and swore in court declarations that she had nothing to do with the damaging press coverage. Yet the text messages suggest the opposite. She not only planted stories, but coordinated with multiple journalists in an attempt to clean up Blake's public image at the expense of others, particularly Justin and Melissa. And if the Daily Mail knew all this and kept silent, they didn't just fail to uphold journalistic ethics. They may have actively participated in the deception, especially if they pressured James into signing a false declaration to avoid liability. In the end, this entire case may come down to one explosive truth. A reporter was allegedly threatened with the loss of his job for telling the truth. James Lassutka was the first to admit that Leslie Sloan was feeding defamatory information to the press. He exposed her as the source, warned others about the lies, and even told Blake's legal team that he wanted no part in this mess. But once his name appeared in legal documents and the lawsuits began piling up, everything changed. He suddenly reversed his story, submitting a declaration that didn't match anything he had said before, and the video suggests that this wasn't a change of heart. It was the result of legal and professional pressure. The Daily Mail, it appears, had a lot to lose if it came out that one of their reporters had exposed a source who was feeding them false and defamatory information. So instead of standing by the truth, they may have decided to silence it. That's the real scandal here. Not just what Blake's team did or what Leslie Sloan fed to the press, but the possibility that a major media outlet like the Daily Mail may have threatened, intimidated, or coerced a journalist to protect itself from liability. They didn't retract their false stories, they didn't publicly correct the record, and according to the evidence, they placed their pro-Justin coverage behind a paywall while continuing to give free, wide circulation to the Blake-friendly narrative. So, where does this all go from here? If Justin Baldoni's team does decide to appeal or amend their complaint, they may very well challenge the validity of James's declaration. And if that declaration is proven to be false or coerced, it could blow this entire case wide open, not just in court, but in the court of public opinion.